It's been a little while since Age of Imprisonment has come out, and I'm finally ready to sit down and talk about it. Going in, my expectations were pretty high, and honestly, the game mostly delivered. From the opening chapter to the final mission, Age of Imprisonment was a great ride. However, the longer I played, the more I found myself thinking back on the previous Hyrule Warriors game, Age of Calamity. Even after I had achieved 100% completion, I couldn't shake the question: which game actually does things better? And the more I thought about it, the harder that question actually became to answer. So in this video, I want to break that down. This isn't going to be a full review or a deep dive into the lore, just a look into what I think Age of Imprisonment improves on compared to Age of Calamity, where it falls short, and everything else in between. And while there aren't going to be any major spoilers, I am going to give a mild spoiler warning for some characters, side missions, and the reward for 100% completion. So if you haven't played the game yet and you care about those spoilers, this is your warning. With that out of the way, let's get started. I think the best way to start our discussion is to establish what I'll be comparing between the games. Personally, the three aspects that stood out to me the most were the characters, the side content, and of course, the story. While I could also mention the technical aspects of both games, I feel like it would be kind of unfairly biased towards Age of Imprisonment, so I'm not going to do that. Let's start with the characters. Personally, I think Age of Imprisonment does its characters a bit better than Age of Calamity. While its roster may only be bigger by one character, I think that Imprisonment more than makes up for this, given that the majority of its roster consists of original characters. Hell, I'm going to count the sages as original characters here, because you could barely call them that in Tears of the Kingdom. Instead of going the route of, we have champions at home, like a lot of us assumed they would, Age of Imprisonment actually took the time to flesh out each of the sages, giving them unique personalities. However, I think there are two in particular that take the spotlight: Kia and Rafika. Instead of being another soft-spoken Zora princess like Mipha was, Kia is actually rather loud, stoic, and fairly reckless, often wanting to fight first and ask questions later. This is also reflected in her new voice, as the Zora Queen is now voiced by Judy Alice Lee instead of Amelia Gotham. Rafika, meanwhile, is the charming, charismatic chief of the Rito. Unlike the headstrong Teba and Tulin, who would just storm off to do things on their own, Rafika sits back and strategizes first. He's referred to as a tactician on multiple occasions, and this is accurately reflected by his voice actor, Joe Zasia. Funny story about this actually. When I first learned that Joe Zasia voiced Rafika, a few things clicked. Rafika is a charming, charismatic tactician who flies, uses a bow, and is voiced by Joe Zasia. For my Fire Emblem fans out there, he probably sounds pretty damn similar to Claude Von Regan from Fire Emblem Three Houses. So I obviously made a joke about this on Blue Sky, only to find out like an hour later that Age of Imprisonment almost shares the exact same scenario writing team as Fire Emblem Three Houses. What are the odds? All in all, I really liked the characterization that was given to each of the sages, allowing them to fully be something more than the faceless lore givers that they were in Tears of the Kingdom. Despite the fact that they were introduced to us back in 2023, Age of Imprisonment is the real introduction of the sages. I think this is largely why I believe that Imprisonment did its characters a little better than Calamity. Most of Imprisonment's characters were essentially created from scratch, while Calamity's characters already had established personalities outside of one or two exceptions. None of this is to say that Calamity's characters were bad, far from it. I mean, Age of Calamity had Revali, so it's literally impossible for it to be bad. I just think that Imprisonment deserves recognition for having such a colorful cast made up of mostly brand new characters. I've gotta give credit where credit is due. Speaking of giving credit where it's due, I think it's time we took a look at the side content. Being a spiritual successor to Calamity, Imprisonment is almost the exact same in terms of gameplay. The main screen is once again a map of Hyrule that displays all the main missions, side missions, and quests to be completed. When a battle is completed, the player is rewarded with various materials that can be used to complete quests to power up their characters. However, a new addition to Age of Imprisonment is something called a side quests. These are character-specific quests that can be completed by doing a given task. By completing all of them for a specific character, you're rewarded with a bonus conversation that provides some cute and oftentimes funny dialogue between the characters. For For example, the bonus dialogue for Vence, aka Revali's distant ancestor, reveals that Rafika, despite appearing uptight, is actually quite reckless, oftentimes disappearing for hours only to return and act like it was nothing. It really shows how much Vence cares for Rafika, being one of his oldest friends. It's a fairly nice touch that helps to better flesh out all of these characters. So here's why I don't like them. While these instances of secret dialogue can often be pretty neat, I don't think that they're an adequate reward for the aside quests. Every character has multiple phases of quests that needs to be completed, with each phase having 3 quests. Some of these quests are easy, like upgrading a weapon 3 times or defeating 50 enemies using special attacks. However, as they continue, they start to get a bit tedious, in my opinion. Many of these quests will require you to replay certain levels as certain characters to defeat certain enemies. No joke, I had to replay one side mission 4 times because it was one of the few levels that let me fight Phantom Ganon, and it was the fastest one to get done. Speaking of repetitive, the side missions. With the small exception of a handful, they are all basically the exact same thing. Capture enemy outposts and defeat the boss. I know that's the point of Musou games like this, but a lot of side missions felt like they just lacked variety. Age of Calamity's side missions had a good deal of variety, with you sometimes getting to face your own allies in battle. For example, the Miss Vi battle pageant, where you could only choose from a limited number of characters and had to fight the rest, as well as Link in his Gerudo disguise. There was also the difficult Siege of Fort Hateno, which required you to defend your outpost from Guardians, defeat Aster, defeat Harbinger Ganon, and defeat Calamity Ganon, all in under 10 minutes. Imprisonment doesn't have any challenges like that, and that's really disappointing in my opinion. But surely there's some cool stuff locked behind the post-game, right? Surely there's some cool secret ending or characters like there was in Age of Calamity, right? Well, kinda. When you beat the game, Lunalia, the chambermaid who attended to Zelda, gives you a series of missions to help her complete her murals by collecting sketches of the various parts of Hyrule. In order to get each sketch, you need to do everything within the various regions of Hyrule until that region is 100% complete. And yes, that includes the aside quests. And you want to know what your reward is for doing everything? The credits. No, I'm not joking. The reward for completing Age of Imprisonment 100% is a stylized version of the credits. Well, that's 30 hours of my life I'm never getting back. Don't get me wrong, the credits in the style of the murals are super nice and give us a lot of new sprites that I'll undoubtedly use in the future. But like, seriously? Calamity at least gave us the OG Warriors outfit for Link, so that's something, but this? This is just disappointing. All in all, I think it's pretty clear that Calamity's side content was a lot better than Imprisonment's. I had way more fun completing Age of Calamity 100% than I did Age of Imprisonment. But with that being said, I don't think anyone was playing either game for their side content. If anything, we were all here for the story. I think the story was easily most people's biggest concern when going into Age of Imprisonment. Not because we were worried about whether it would be better or worse than Tears of the Kingdoms. Okay, no, that was definitely a concern, but other than that, we were worried about its canonicity. I'm sure a lot of you remember when Age of Calamity was first announced, Eiji Aonuma himself said in the reveal that, quote, "This game takes place 100 years before the events of The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild." With that kind of wording, pretty much everyone assumed that the game would be a canon prequel to Breath of the Wild. But when the demo for the game launched, we were all pretty shocked to find that the main plot would revolve around a time-traveling egg trying to prevent the Calamity. I at least thought that there would be some kind of hidden non-canon good ending alongside a canon bad ending, but that's not at all what happened. This made quite a few people upset, since this wasn't what we were told the game would be about. If they had wanted to make a what-if story, then they should have just marketed the game as such. So you can imagine how skeptical everyone, myself included, was when Age of Imprisonment was revealed as, quote, the story leading up to Tears of the Kingdom. Luckily for us though, Nintendo did the unthinkable and listened to feedback. In their press release, they made it clear that Age of Imprisonment would be canon, meaning that unexpected time travel shenanigans weren't going to happen. Kinda. With all that background out of the way, it's time I answered the big question. Is the story of Age of Imprisonment any good? Yes. The story, in my opinion, was absolutely fantastic from start to finish, adding little bits of context here and there to fill out some of the gaps left by the memories. Hell, it kind of even addresses why there was no mention of Calamo or the construct in Tears of the Kingdom. I can say, without a doubt, the story of Age of Imprisonment is canon. And that's one of its flaws. I know that seems like a wild thing to say, especially since I was one of the people concerned about how canon the game would be. But now that I've beaten the game, there's a good reason I feel this way. When I beat the main story, I had mixed feelings. Not because I thought the story was bad or anything, but because I didn't really feel like I had won. And that's when it hit me. If you go into Age of Imprisonment with the context of Tears of the Kingdom, then you know what happens. No matter what, Rauru still sacrifices himself, Zelda still becomes the Light Dragon, and most importantly, Ganondorf still reawakens. I felt like I hadn't won because I didn't win. Now, maybe that's an unpopular take. Maybe I'm the only one who feels this way about the ending, and all of you are just looking at your screens in confusion. You know, if you weren't already because of the wolf. But at the end of the day, I feel like this is why Age of Calamity took the approach it did. I've always held the belief that the reason Age of Calamity wasn't a canon prequel to Breath of the Wild was because of how the Calamity played out. The game would have ended with most of the characters dead and Zelda sacrificing herself to hold Calamity Ganon at bay. It would be pretty hard for the player to feel like they won with that kind of an ending. By going with a what-if story and having the characters succeed in defeating Calamity Ganon, it gives a lot of these characters some much-needed closure and makes the player feel like they've actually won. Am I saying this was the best approach? No, definitely not. As I said earlier, I think it would have been a lot better for them to have gone with a canon bad ending and a non-canon good ending. That way, the game could still be canon while also allowing the player the satisfaction of winning. So that begs the question, which game does the story better? If we're looking at how well the story was executed and how it connects with its respective game, then I would have to say Age of Imprisonment. The story is strong from start to finish, and it segues nicely into the present-day story of Tears of the Kingdom, which could be viewed as an Act 2 of sorts. However, if we're looking exclusively at the stories of Calamity and Imprisonment, completely ignoring the context of their respective games, then I would have to say Age of Calamity does its story better. Its story has a far more conclusive ending and honestly felt a lot more satisfying to beat. Either way, the stories of both games are enjoyable, and I'm honestly not sure if I can say that one is definitively better than the other. I'm sure somebody down in the comments will completely disagree with me and just list every single reason why my opinion is utterly wrong and why I'm a trash YouTuber, but honestly, that's their opinion, and that's free engagement for me, so it's a win-win either way. But anyway, I think it's time we wrapped up here. Age of Calamity and Age of Imprisonment are both really enjoyable games that I think more people should try out. Calamity is great for the people who love the world and characters of Breath of the Wild and want a story with a satisfying ending. It set out to give us a view on what the Great Calamity was like, and to an extent, I'd argue it achieved that. Age of Imprisonment, on the other hand, is great for people who weren't entirely satisfied with the story of Tears of the Kingdom, especially the memories. It better contextualizes a number of the original scenes, showing the moments that led up to or directly followed them. While there are only a handful of previously existing characters, the original characters created for the game are all fun and endearing in my opinion. And while the ending personally left me feeling a bit unsatisfied, that's because it wasn't really the ending. the game truly ends when you beat Tears of the Kingdom. And that's about it for me. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me yap about my thoughts on Age of Calamity and Imprisonment, and if you made it this far into the video, then why not subscribe? We're getting ridiculously close to the big 10K, and you know you want to be part of that massive milestone. Either way, thank you all for watching, never forget your courage, and I'll see you next time.